Everyone ignored the canine police dog barking at the janitor's closet. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, as if his instincts were trying to scream what no one else could see. He clawed at the floor, growled low in his throat, and refused to budge even. When tugged away, most dismissed it as typical behavior. Perhaps he smelled cleaning chemicals or was distracted by old food wrappers, but what Rocky sensed behind that old wooden door wasn't ordinary. It wasn't fumes or rodents or rusted mop handles. It was something hidden, something meant to stay hidden, and that something was not meant to be found. The janitor passed by countless times that morning with a face that gave away nothing, but Rocky didn't need expressions to see the truth. It was buried deep just beyond that narrow closet door at the end of the hallway, a place no one questioned, a place no one checked what they would eventually find. There would leave the city stunned, shake the school to its core, and turn one silent hallway into the most talked-about location in the state. Before we begin this story of instinct silence and the truth clawing to be heard, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another moment like this one. It had been a gray-skied Monday, heavy with a sense of routine that blanketed everything. Officer Tyler Kane stepped out of his cruiser, parked at the front of Lincoln High School. Just minutes before the first bell, he was 32, composed and clean-cut, with a pressed uniform and sharp eyes, but it was the dog beside him who truly stood out. Rocky, a seasoned German shepherd with a sable coat and eyes that didn't miss anything stepped onto the sidewalk with precision, his ears flicked forward, tail level, body already alert, as if he sensed the day wouldn't unfold like any other. The school was alive with chatter, students weaving through doorways, slamming lockers, exchanging greetings and groans about the start of the week. The K-9 unit had been invited for a scheduled campus security sweep, something that had become standard procedure at Lincoln. Hi. Tyler clipped the leash to his vest, nodded to the school security officer waiting at the door, and led Rocky through the main hall. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly above the scent of floor wax and adolescent sweat hung in the air. On the surface, it was just another ordinary school day. Beneath it, something was festering. Rocky knew as they passed rows of lockers. Rocky kept close to Tyler's side, nose low to the ground, occasionally pausing to sniff more intently at certain spots. Tyler made mental notes, casually observing entry points and fire exits, checking that locked doors stayed locked. It was a job he could almost do with his eyes closed, but today Rocky was acting different. He wasn't just sniffing surfaces or catching random scents. He was fixated, sharp, and unusually tense. Halfway down the east wing, they reached the junction of a narrow hallway lined with supply closets and storage doors. The janitor's closet, old, wood-paneled and barely maintained, stood at the end. Its paint was chipped, the handle tarnished. Tyler barely glanced at it as they passed, but Rocky halted mid-step. His body went rigid, nose twitching, ears flat. Then a low growl began to rumble from his chest. Tyler gave the leash a gentle tug. Rocky hesitated, then moved forward, but not without looking back over his shoulder twice. They continued their sweep, moving through the gym, the locker rooms, the staff offices, all areas where problems usually hid. Rocky remained attentive, but his focus kept snapping back in the direction of the east wing. Something behind that closet door refused to leave his thoughts. His paws moved forward, but his instinct stayed behind. Tyler noticed the repeated glances, the stiffness in Rocky's gait, but attributed it to lingering cleaning smells or lingering curiosity. Nothing unusual, at least not enough to report by the time they looped around again. The school was fully in session. Classrooms were filled. The halls grew quiet, but the door to the janitor's closet still stood there, closed and inconspicuous, like a forgotten relic wedged between science labs and vending machines. Rocky's tail stiffened again as they neared it. His pace slowed. He turned toward it deliberately, almost drawing Tyler toward it. Then he stopped completely. Another low growl emerged. His eyes locked on the door like he was staring through it, and this time he barked, a sharp, clear bark that echoed down the empty hallway and bounced off the lockers like a shot fired in the dark. The bark rang through the hallway, sharp and sudden, slicing through the thick silence that had settled once the classroom doors closed. It was not the playful bark of an eager dog or the excited reaction to a familiar scent. It was a warning, deep and deliberate, like a siren only a trained handler could understand. Rocky stood rigid, his body a coiled spring, his fur raised slightly along his spine, eyes narrowed on the old janitor's closet, as if it had betrayed some unspoken truth. Tyler turned and looked, registering the door more consciously now. Its aged wood dull. Under the overhead lights, its handle slightly off-center, the kind of door people walked past without a second thought. But the dog was not moving, and in that moment the hallway felt unnaturally long. Every shadow stretched just a little too far. Tyler paused, hand brushing the leash, but he didn't tug. Instead, he watched Rocky's posture. The canine's breath came shallow, and fast muscles tensed, his legs rooted, like he was ready to launch forward. The second that door creaked open, a janitor's closet in a school should have been insignificant. Mops, buckets, rags, bottles of floor cleaner, but Rocky had no interest in cleaning products. Something behind that door was triggering instincts honed over years of training, instincts sharpened by drills, searches, real operations that had led to real discoveries. This wasn't curiosity, it was detection. Still nothing moved. The door remained shut. No sound came from within. Tyler's gaze drifted up and down the hallway, noting the stillness, the lack of witnesses, the weight of quiet that settled heavier by the second. He gently redirected Rocky, who gave a reluctant glance back, and they continued the patrol, leaving the east wing behind. But neither of them truly walked away. Something invisible had been stirred, a presence behind that door, a scent no human could detect, and Rocky wasn't forgetting. They moved through the lower level, passing mechanical rooms and maintenance storage, tracing the familiar pattern of a typical inspection. Rocky's alertness never dipped, but now it felt fractured, as if he was half in the moment, half back in that hallway. Even as they climbed the stairs toward the main floor, the dog would glance backward, his ears constantly shifting with every sound. Tyler, now more aware than before, took note of each twitch and hesitation. He knew, Rocky well knew, when he was alert, bored, curious, or concerned. This was none of those. This was agitation. Upstairs, the principal greeted them in the main office, offering standard pleasantries as students passed by the windows in blurs of backpacks and hoodies. Everything on the surface appeared normal, routine, but Tyler's thoughts remained anchored on the closet, and Rocky, standing beside him, still stared in that direction, his body quiet but unmistakably focused. The presence of students didn't distract him, neither did the bustling rhythm of school operations. Something had fixed itself in his mind. Outside the office, two janitors pushed carts down the hallway, exchanging nods with the officer as they passed. One of them, a man with short gray hair and a blue work shirt, gave a tight smile, then looked away quickly. Rocky tracked his movement without blinking, the tension in his shoulders never softening. Tyler made note of it, not as a suspicion, but as a puzzle piece. He had learned long ago to trust Rocky's eyes, even if they didn't match what his own were seeing. The subtle reactions, the small stiffness in behavior, all of it mattered. Dogs didn't fake concern, they didn't second guesses their instincts, they reacted to the world as it truly was. They resumed their sweep. Classrooms remained quiet. The gym echoed with distant footsteps. A custodian's radio crackled from somewhere down the west hall. Every turn, every corner felt colder than usual. Rocky sniffed at door frames, paused at thresholds, but nothing sparked that same visceral response as the closet had still. Tyler couldn't let go of it. The bark, the stance, the refusal to move, it lingered like the fading echo of something not yet understood. As they circled back toward the original hallway, the building seemed to narrow. The locker-lined corridor stretched out like a funnel, drawing them toward the east wing. Again, students were tucked away in classrooms. Now the hallway was bare, and once more as they neared the old closet door, Rocky's body shifted. Not a slow change, but an immediate one. Head raised, nose in the air, a low growl returning to his throat like an old engine restarting. He walked faster, then slower, then came to a stop in front of the closet. The door stood exactly as before, silent, innocent in appearance, with no sign of forced entry or disturbance. But Rocky refused to move this time. His bark didn't come immediately. He stared, growled, sniffed the floor with precision. Then his head lifted again, and the bark exploded from him, louder than the first. Tyler looked at the door. The aging brass handle, the floor scuffed from years of mops and boots. A second bark followed, more insistent this time. Tyler's breath caught slightly in his chest. He knew his partner well enough to know this wasn't a fluke. Whatever was behind that door wasn't staying hidden much longer. The sound cut through the corridor like a blade. Sharp, commanding, unmistakable. Rocky's bark was not loud for attention or in reaction to noise. It was full of urgency, rooted in something deeper than instinct. It was a declaration, a demand for focus, a signal that something was wrong, officer. Tyler Kane, standing just steps away, froze. His hand hovered near the leash. He turned, slowly, eyes narrowing toward the closet at the end of the hall, a door like any other in the building, bland, worn, silent. But Rocky did not see doors. He saw presence, intent, movement beneath the surface, and whatever he sensed behind that thin barrier of wood and metal was growing stronger. Rocky's legs spread slightly, weight balanced evenly, tail still, every fiber of his body locked in position. His gaze never drifted. Tyler, now watching closely, saw the same look in Rocky's eyes that he had seen in back alleys and narcotics busts, in darkened warehouses where things had gone wrong. It was the gaze of pure practice, detection, focused without hesitation, uncheckable. But this was a school, not a back alley. A hallway with lockers and student artwork pinned to bulletin boards. It wasn't a place where danger should settle. In shadows, the officer's breath slowed as his mind turned, assembling fragments of awareness. Rocky had barked once before at this closet earlier that morning, quieter than perhaps, uncertain, but now this was conviction. No indecision remained in the way he planted himself, nor in the low growl that followed each sharp bark. Still, the hallway remained silent. No one came out of the classrooms, no footsteps approached, only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the mechanical whir of the heating system overhead served as background to Rocky's determined stance. The door didn't budge. There was no visible movement from inside, no creak, no shuffle, not even the whisper of shifting air. But Rocky was already reacting to something beyond hearing. His nostrils flared slightly, his chest expanding and contracting with quicker breath. His gaze sharpened further, if such a thing were possible, and his growl grew deeper, anchored in his chest, like a warning bell from someplace he didn't know how to explain. Tyler knelt beside him, briefly observing his posture more closely. The German Shepherd's ears were drawn forward, locked in a forward-leaning alert that couldn't be trained. It had to be felt. Tyler's thoughts moved through the options. He had seen Rocky act out on faint drug traces, hidden compartments, or subtle human sense, but never this rigidly. The officer's grip on the leash tightened slightly, not to pull the dog back, but to prepare. Rocky wasn't responding to noise. He wasn't reacting to other people. He was standing against something sealed, something hidden in a place meant to be forgotten. The janitor's closet that everyone walked past every day without ever looking twice. He glanced once more at the closet door, which seemed now to lean under invisible pressure. Every line of the hallway directed focus toward it. The way the lockers ended, the way the walls narrowed, as if the architecture had been waiting for this very moment to unfold. Rocky let out a third bark, louder than the last, each one timed with an almost surgical precision, like a countdown that only he understood. His paws scraped the floor once, followed by another growl. There was no sign from within, no sound, no response, but the weight behind the door, whatever it was, had wrapped its presence around Rocky's senses like a vice. Tyler rose slowly. His mind replayed the earlier conversation with the staff, the offhand assurance that the closet held nothing but supplies, yet the dog wouldn't leave. He refused to look away. His body trembled slightly, not from fear but anticipation. He knew someone or something was there behind them. A faint echo of laughter filtered from a distant classroom, pulling Tyler briefly out of the moment. But when he looked down again, Rocky was still planted like stone, eyes still locked, tail unmoving, ears stiff. The hallway now felt impossibly long, stretched by silence. Whatever existed behind that door was not meant to be seen by casual eyes. It had survived this long by hiding in plain sight, by trusting people to overlook it, to accept ordinary doors as ordinary spaces. Tyler gently coaxed Rocky away, not because the moment had passed, but because they needed answers. The hallway stayed behind them, still and unchanged, yet entirely different now, a place marked. Rocky continued to glance back, even as they moved forward, every step stiff with resistance. Tyler's mind, too, stayed anchored there, playing over every second of Rocky's bark, every twitch in his stance. The closet had shifted something in both of them by the time they reached the front office. The unease had grown too loud to ignore. The office buzzed with a false sense of calm, a veneer of order stretched across the surface, like polished glass hiding cracks beneath. Officer Tyler Kane stood near the counter, clipboard in hand, mentally replaying the moment in the hallway, the way Rocky had locked eyes on the janitor's closet, how his entire frame tensed with purpose. The sharp barks that echoed louder than any alarm the reception area was filled with the usual clutter phone lines. Blinking silently, a stack of forms half filled the hum of an old desktop computer, but none of it could muffle the weight pressing. On Tyler's thoughts, the janitor's closet had turned into more than a supply space. It had become a question. He couldn't stop asking himself. A man emerged from the side office, tall, lean, dressed in a dark blue custodial uniform, and introduced himself. With a polite nod, his expression was difficult to read. He moved with casual steps, hands loose at his sides, but there was something controlled in the way he held himself. His eyes flicked toward Rocky, who stood at Tyler's side, still on alert, though. Outwardly calm, the janitor's face didn't change, but Rocky's head tilted slightly, ears rising again as if the scent lingering on this man matched what he had detected behind the closet door. Tyler took note of the subtle shift in posture from the dog. Something no one else in the room seemed to notice or understand. Another man, older and rounder, stepped forward with the familiarity of someone used to questions. He explained that the closet had been inspected earlier, just the usual supplies. Nothing unusual. He offered vague reassurances about the safety of the school and the routine nature of daily checks. Tyler nodded as the staff described the contents: buckets, bleach dustpans, and aging janitorial tools, but his mind refused to file it away as closed. Rocky was trained to sniff narcotics, explosives, human scent, not disinfectant. If the closet had only contained what they claimed, the dog would have passed it without a second glance, but instead he had reacted with a focus sharper than any previous sweep. Tyler could recall the conversation continued, light and dismissive, almost patronizing in its tone. Tyler listened, filed their answers, and watched as Rocky never once relaxed. The canine's eyes kept darting toward the hallway, nose twitching as though the scent hadn't faded with distance. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm more alert than calm, and he shifted his weight from paw to paw in quiet readiness. For Tyler, that was confirmation enough that something was off. Though the room itself buzzed with the dull drone of routine, the principal soon entered, appearing friendly and unconcerned, gesturing toward the school map on the wall to show the officer the completed areas of inspection. Tyler's eyes followed the layout, but his mind hovered over one small square tucked near the east wing, the janitor's closet, a barely marked corner drawn without distinction, yet now holding more weight in Tyler's thoughts than the entire building combined. He offered a neutral nod, recorded a few observations, and thanked the staff for their time, but internally a line had been drawn. Rocky remained still as they exited the office, his pace measured, his focus unshaken, even in the bustle of mid-morning activity. With lockers slamming and announcements humming from the intercom, his head turned back once more toward the direction of the closet. He wasn't done. Tyler could feel it in the leash, in the subtle tension in the dog's frame, in the way every step forward was matched by a lingering pull backward. It was like Rocky knew they had walked away too soon. They entered the main hallway again, students parting slightly at the sight of the uniformed pair. Tyler scanned the faces as they passed, laughter here, fatigue there, some rushing to class, others drifting aimlessly, but none seemed aware of what had just occurred. Behind closed doors, the school functioned like a machine churning through its day on autopilot, unaware that a critical warning had already been sounded and ignored only. Rocky seemed to carry the weight of what hadn't been seen. Tyler adjusted his pace, deciding to complete the rest of the sweep, but his thoughts were already circling back. Each room they checked afterward felt like a delay, a detour away from the real point of concern. Rocky cooperated, searching corners and sniffing surfaces, but the depth of his concentration didn't match what they'd seen earlier. He worked, but his instincts were anchored elsewhere. The janitor's closet had marked itself in his mind, a scent he hadn't resolved, a signal he hadn't completed. When they rounded the final hallway, nearly back to where it had begun, Tyler felt the same gravity pulling them again, and Rocky, without prompting, without hesitation, began moving faster, eyes fixed once more on the end of the corridor, the place where the door remained closed. The hallway stretched out before them like a quiet stage, polished floors, locked lockers, walls lined with posters. No one really read. The building had settled into its mid-morning rhythm. Behind closed doors, lessons unfolded, the buzz of a typical school day concealed behind drywall and tile, but for Rocky the day had never become routine. He was no longer just working, he was returning. Every movement in his stride was sharper, every sniff at the air more focused, as if retracing a path only he understood. Officer Tyler Kane followed, silent, alert, allowing the leash to loosen. Just slightly. There was no need to guide the dog. Rocky was leading, now drawn back to the door that had never left his thoughts. The janitor's closet loomed again at the end of the corridor, nothing visibly different about it. Same wooden surface, same scratched paint, same dull handle that caught the light. Just enough to suggest use, but the atmosphere had changed. Tyler could feel it. Something in the air clung heavier than before, not scent, not sound, but weight. It was as if the space itself remembered what had been overlooked. The quiet was deeper, more unnatural. Even the fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting a faint pulse across the floor tiles. Rocky stopped 6 feet from the door. His body dropped low, ears flattened, tail stiff and straight. A low growl rumbled from his throat, steady and deliberate, like a motor revving up before release. Tyler recognized it immediately. Not a threat, but a signal. Rocky was done waiting. His instincts had moved from observation to action. The tension in his muscles vibrated through the leash, his paws flexing against the ground, his gaze locked on the old door with the kind of stillness that came only before a storm. Then he barked, louder than before, a full-chested, echoing explosion of sound that bounced off the lockers and shot through the hallway like a flare in the sky. Another bark followed, then another, each one perfectly spaced, rhythmic in its urgency, as though Rocky was counting down to something he couldn't yet see. Tyler glanced around, heart quickening, aware now that this moment could no longer be dismissed. The sound had changed the temperature of the air. The hallway, so empty seconds ago, now felt charged. Rocky lunged forward, slightly, claws scraping the floor. Leash taut, his nose pressed toward the crack of the door frame. He sniffed, froze, then barked again, ears pinned back, breathing rapid. Tyler's pulse rose as he took in the sight. The dog was locked into full detection mode, more intense than anything he had seen from him in recent memory. This wasn't the behavior of a curious dog picking up scattered scents. This was targeted, honed, and undeniable. Footsteps approached from behind, the distant shuffle of shoes over tile, and then pause. Someone had heard, maybe a teacher on break, maybe staff. Curious about the sound, Tyler didn't turn his focus, stayed with Rocky, watching every detail, the rippling of his fur along the back, the positioning of his legs, the slight pivot of his nose as he zeroed in on something just beyond the reach of comprehension. Rocky had never acted this way in a school setting. The intensity was off the scale. The officer stepped closer, allowing Rocky the space to position himself directly in front of the door. The dog stood rigid, now one front paw slightly raised, a slow growl still humming beneath his breath. The barking stopped for a moment, replaced by stillness. A new kind of tension filled the space. It wasn't sound that defined it anymore, it was the absence of it, like a deep breath being held. Just before a revelation, Tyler stared at the closet door. It remained unmoved, unchanged, just as it had all morning. Yet somehow it now radiated a sense of refusal, a refusal to be seen, a refusal to be opened. But Rocky had already pulled the veil back. He had sensed what others couldn't, and his refusal to leave, his refusal to quiet, had forced the truth closer to the surface. Something inside that space was waiting, buried behind the familiarity of brooms and shelves. Behind the door, silence lingered, but not the kind that calmed it. Was the kind that listened. Tyler adjusted his grip on the leash, his eyes narrowing slightly as the hallway stood frozen in time. He didn't know what lay beyond the door, but he knew the moment to find out was no longer far away. The rest of the school felt distant, almost dreamlike, as Officer Tyler Kane walked the outer perimeter with Rocky trotting beside him, the leash slack but alive with tension. Their steps moved forward through the halls and stairwells, yet neither of them had truly left the East Wing. Tyler's mind was no longer anchored in routine. Each room he entered, each corridor they swept, became a distraction, a delay from the question pressing harder with every tick of the clock. What had Rocky sensed inside that closet? What lived behind that door, so unremarkable on the outside, yet so charged with unseen weight? Students passed in clusters, carrying books and backpacks, chattering about lessons and lunch menus. The normality of their rhythm only deepened the strangeness of Rocky's reaction. This wasn't an alley or a warehouse or a traffic stop. This was a high school, bright with order, packed with bodies, monitored by cameras, and filled with people trained to notice problems. But no one else had seen what Rocky had no one else had barked, no one else had refused to walk away. Tyler couldn't stop replaying the moment in his mind, the rigid stance, the fixed stare. The pacing breath of a dog who had reached the edge of something. The sound of the bark still echoed in his ears, not fading like noise but reverberating like memory. Rocky hadn't just alerted to something, he had fixated. That intensity had only ever appeared during major operations in buildings, with hidden rooms and vehicles, with concealed compartments, but never inside a school, never aimed at a janitor's closet. As they moved through the gymnasium, Tyler watched. Rocky scanned the air as if checking for validation. The dog's behavior had shifted, he was working, but his mind remained somewhere else. Each sniff, each glance lacked the usual confidence Rocky was waiting for a return. He was waiting for the moment when Tyler would trust his signal and follow it back to the door that had triggered everything. Even now, as they crossed from one side of the building to another, the dog's head turned, often looking toward hallways they weren't supposed to be near. Again, Tyler noticed it every time, and every time the doubt in his chest deepened. A school staff member passed them in the hallway and gave a polite nod. Tyler nodded back without speaking. He felt disconnected from the formalities. The brief conversation in the office earlier had only widened the distance between what he knew and what others were willing to acknowledge. The janitor's calm voice, the easy dismissal of Rocky's behavior, the vague explanations, they all came too quickly, like rehearsed lines from someone who needed questions to go away before they grew teeth, and still no one had offered to open the door. That detail lingered in his mind like a splinter. If the closet held only brooms and bottles, why not prove it? He found himself near the administrative wing once more, walking past the camera monitors mounted on the wall outside the security room. Rows of grainy screens displayed hallway feeds, office angles, exterior gates, all quiet, all uneventful. But as he glanced at the screen showing the east wing, a chill passed through him. The janitor's closet came into view. No movement, no people, just the door, still closed, still unchanged. Yet staring at that small gray image made Tyler feel like it was watching him back. He looked down at Rocky, who stood still, ears perked. The dog hadn't taken his eyes off the same screen. Something clicked quietly in that moment, not from the camera or the room, but from inside Tyler's thoughts. Rocky was giving him everything he needed, the hesitation, the persistence, the refusal to let it go. None of it was a mistake. If he ignored it again, the consequences wouldn't fall on Rocky, they would fall on him. As they stepped out into the hallway, again the building seemed different. The walls that had felt sturdy now seemed to hum with secrets. The floors, once just polished tile, now felt like barriers, covering something hidden. Even the air carried a strange weight, like the building itself was trying to hold its breath. Tyler adjusted his stride. He no longer felt like an officer completing a routine. He felt like someone being led toward something buried behind them. The sun slipped behind a thick cloud, dimming the windows slightly. The light shifted, shadows lengthened along the corridor. Rocky's head turned toward the east wing again, and this time Tyler didn't stop him. He followed silently as the dog pulled them back to the place where the question had been asked but never answered. The silence inside the small security room felt different from the rest of the school, thicker, somehow compressed by time. And electronic screens lined the wall in uneven rows, each flickering with muted footage from various corners of the building. Narrow stairwells, breezeways, cafeteria doors, back parking lots, locker-lined corridors, every space caught in soft grayscale. Hours of ordinary movement compressed into quiet observation. Tyler stood with his arms crossed, eyes locked on the monitors, the glow reflecting faintly off his badge. Rocky sat beside him, head raised, ears twitching with every mechanical hum coming from the surveillance equipment. This room offered no distractions, no voices, no footsteps, only evidence waiting to be seen. Tyler gestured for the footage to be rewound, fingers tapping rhythmically against the counter. He wanted to see what had happened before the school day began, long before the bell rang, before Rocky's bark split the hallway into before and after. The footage rolled backward, time unwinding frame by frame, erasing crowds and footsteps until only darkness remained in the halls. Then the early hours began to crawl forward, once more quiet and slow. The building came alive in small pulses, a light flicking on here, a cart being pushed, their shadows drifting as early staff arrived. Doors creaking open for the day ahead at 6:12 a. And something changed. Tyler leaned forward from the edge of the east wing corridor. A lone figure appeared stepping carefully into view. He wore dark clothing and moved with measured purpose. Head down, face obscured by the brim of a faded cap in his hands, a large duffel bag, thick, heavy, clearly burdened by its contents. He paused near the janitor's closet, glancing behind him. Briefly, before pulling out a key and opening the door, the footage showed no hesitation. He moved with intention, disappearing inside with the bag and re-emerging 4 minutes later, this time empty-handed, moving briskly down the hall and out of frame. Tyler narrowed, his eyes analyzing every detail. The man's movements lacked the casual rhythm of a maintenance worker. There was no cart, no clipboard, no indication of a morning checklist, just the bag and a mission. Rocky stood up beside him, sniffing the edge of the screen as if he could pull scent from pixels. The image held no sound, no smell, no emotion, but something in the way the figure moved. The stillness in the frame, when the door closed behind him, said more than a voice ever could. The footage continued, and others began to appear. Real staff, real students, the day beginning in full, but Tyler kept coming back to those 4 minutes, watching them again, rewinding, pausing, playing them in reverse and forward like a code he couldn't quite break. The time stamped, the angle, the route. The man took all of it, pressed on him. If not for Rocky, that moment might have vanished unnoticed in the flow of the day, but now it glared like a warning light, pulsing from the screen, demanding to be acknowledged. He scanned through additional recordings, searching for other appearances of the same figure, but the face remained elusive. No clear angles, no direct shots, just brief moments, half-turns, the back of a head. But the duffel bag was real, the key was real, and the choice to use that specific closet, not another, not a storage room or unused classroom, hinted at something carefully planned. Tyler could no longer chalk this up to suspicion. Rocky's bark had unearthed a thread, and now the line was beginning to pull. The minutes slipped by as he searched, studied, and followed every frame of the morning's footage. Rocky eventually sat again, but his posture remained upright, his eyes still alert. The dog hadn't forgotten what brought them here, and now the video had given form to what he had sensed: a figure entering with something and leaving without it. A man. No one had mentioned a bag that hadn't been claimed, a door that had stayed shut ever since. Tyler stood, his pulse slower now, but his certainty sharpened. This wasn't imagination, this wasn't just instinct, this was real, documented, timed, recorded. The closet was no longer a question, it was a lead. He walked back toward the hallway, where it waited, Rocky close behind their footsteps, silent against the floor. The door had not moved, it stood as it had all day, but now the air around it felt heavier inside. Something weighted, something sealed away by wood, metal, and the silence of those who didn't ask enough questions. The hallway had not changed, same lights overhead, same lockers stretching in silent rows, same posters fluttering faintly from recycled air moving through vents, yet everything about it felt transformed. Officer Tyler Kane moved with deliberate steps, each one sinking deeper into certainty. The janitor's closet now held a different weight in his mind, no longer just a door, but a threshold. Something had been placed behind it, something hidden by a man who had arrived before sunrise and left without a trace. Rocky walked beside him, nose pointed forward, tail low and stiff, each paw fall more precise than the last. The dog was no longer urging Tyler forward, he was guiding him towards something neither of them could name, yet Tyler's thoughts pulsed with details from the surveillance footage: the man's angle of entry, the duffel bag, the 4 minutes of absence, the key that opened a door meant to remain ignored. Nothing about the footage screamed danger, but it didn't need to. The quiet precision of the figure had said enough. Whatever had been placed inside that closet was not meant to be found during a school day. It had been meant to stay sealed until long after classes ended and hallways emptied. Tyler's job was no longer just to patrol and observe. It had shifted to uncovering what others had missed or chosen not to see. As he neared the door again, Rocky slowed. The air felt heavier, denser. The dog paused near the frame, nose brushing the baseboard, ears twitching at the slightest creak from deeper in the building. Then he sat, but not out of rest. It was a waiting posture, still focused, patient, the kind that said the moment wasn't finished, only paused. Tyler stood in front of the door, eyes scanning its surface. Again, same chipped paint, same handle, but now with what he knew, it looked more like a trapdoor than a closet. Something that covered a secret rather than simply holding supplies. A faint shuffle echoed down the corridor. Tyler turned, footsteps approaching from the far end, slow, but steady the figure came into view, same blue uniform, same name stitched above. The pocket same janitor he had met hours earlier. He pushed a small cleaning cart, a trash bag slumped over the edge mop handle, swaying slightly as the wheels bumped along the uneven tile. There was nothing aggressive in his pace, nothing alarming in his expression, but Tyler's pulse shifted. The janitor's eyes flicked toward the closet, only for a second, fast, instinctive, almost imperceptible, before settling back on Tyler. It was the kind of glance someone gives toward something they're trying to protect without looking like they are. Rocky stood instantly, his body tensed again, ears pre-cricked, tail stiff, his stare locked onto the man with the cart, unmoving, no growl, no bark, just pure stillness. Tyler watched both of them, the dog and the janitor, a line forming between them that no one had drawn, yet clearly existed. The janitor stopped a few feet away, hands resting on the cart handle. His face remained calm, pleasant even, but his shoulders had stiffened beneath the fabric. Tyler noticed it, a tightness, a resistance held beneath practiced movements. For a long second, no one moved. The air seemed to hold itself still, as if the school had gone quiet all at once. Listening with breath held, Tyler's thoughts churned, the footage, the bag, the glance, Rocky's unwavering tension. Everything led here. Every unanswered question pointed back to this man and this door. The closet, once dismissed, now pulsed with urgency. The janitor adjusted his grip on the cart, eyes lingering on Rocky, who had not blinked. The dog's instincts had never faltered, not once throughout the day, not when staff dismissed him, not when cameras revealed shadows, not now as the person in front of them tried to appear as nothing more than part of the background. Tyler felt the moment stretch. His hand hovered near his belt, not out of fear, but readiness. The hallway was empty, but charged, like the moment before a storm, when everything quiets, not out of peace, but because something is about to break. Rocky leaned forward ever so slightly. The message was clear. The closet could no longer remain shut. The person who had unlocked it in secret now stood in front of it again, hoping time would bury the truth, but Rocky had waited long enough, and this time Tyler wasn't going to walk away. The hallway was locked in a stillness that felt unnatural, as though time had pressed pause on everything beyond that narrow stretch of floor. Tyler Kane stood directly in front of the janitor's closet, his posture steady, his breath, even though every muscle in his body had tightened. Rocky stood to his left, unmoving, head high, eyes flicked upward toward the door, as if tracking some invisible current no one else could see behind them. The echoes of the school's activities seemed to vanish, the laughter, the footsteps, the scattered buzz of lessons and movement. It all faded into a silence that clung to the walls like dust. All attention, all weight, all consequence now gathered at single point, the closet door that had refused to explain itself. The janitor didn't speak. He remained near the cart, one hand resting on the mop handle, the other near his hip, fingers curling slightly as if waiting for a cue that would never come. His expression remained blank, calm on the surface, but Tyler had seen enough in his career to know what silence often masked. It was not peace, it was calculation, the kind that filled spaces between actions, stretched out by the hope that stillness could buy more time. But Rocky had already stolen that luxury away. His reaction, his refusal to leave, had forced truth to surface, not by force but by focus. Tyler reached forward, his fingers grazing the handle. It was warm to the touch, as though it had recently been used. Despite the closet being marked as sealed for months, he glanced once more at Rocky, who had taken a small step forward, nose nearly pressed to the bottom of the door. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell quickly, not from fear or exhaustion, but anticipation. He knew what came next, so did Tyler. With one solid turn, the handle clicked. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a spark. The door opened, slowly creaking as it gave way, revealing a space far deeper than it appeared from the outside. The closet was more than a supply room. It was a narrow, dim corridor extending several feet inward, lined with disused shelves and rusted hooks. The air that spilled out was stale, thick with something foul and stagnant. Rocky growled low, barely audible, then stepped forward, muscles taut, tail like a rod of steel behind him. Tyler flipped his flashlight on, sending a narrow beam into the darkness. What he saw turned his stomach, not from fear, but from the clarity of understanding. The shelves held no cleaning tools. Instead, there were wooden crates stacked tightly together, their surfaces marked with faint symbols and tape. Some had been pried open. Inside, metallic cases and black duffel bags, not Unlike the one seen in the surveillance footage, a plastic tarp had been rolled out across part of the floor, and at the far end of the space an air vent had been covered with foam and sealed with duct tape. This was no storage closet, it was a drop site, a hidden compartment embedded within the walls of a school shielded by routine and obscured by indifference. Rocky let out a sharp bark that shattered the silence, echoing deep into the corridor and rattling the edges of the shelves. Tyler stepped in, fully eyes scanning every crevice, his breath catching as more details came into view. Several of the crates had serial numbers scratched off, others bore no markings at all. One was labeled with a name he did not recognize scrolled in pen across the edge of a file folder resting on top, papers, ledgers, everything tucked neatly where cleaning supplies should have been. Behind him, the janitor had not moved, but Tyler knew now that his stillness was no longer an act of passivity. It was a wall meant to hold back a truth he had never expected to be exposed. Rocky growled again, stepping closer into the room, turning once, then planting himself at the base of one of the crates. He scratched at it once, pawing gently at the edge. Before sitting, eyes fixed on Tyler, waiting, there was no longer any doubt. What had been ignored was now undeniable. The closet, hidden in plain sight for who knew how long, had become a chamber of secrets, one Tyler had only opened because he chose to listen to the only voice that barked when everyone else had stayed silent. Outside the room, footsteps echoed faintly. Something was coming. Tyler remained crouched in the narrow space, his flashlight beam catching dust particles that hung suspended like frozen ash in the air. The crates were still in front of him, their wooden edges splintered in places, some corners bound tightly with cord, others cracked open just enough to reveal dark interiors, lined with canvas and metal. Rocky was beside him now, completely still, tail flat, ears pushed forward as his gaze stayed locked on the hallway behind them. Though the room was small, barely wider than a closet, and longer than it had appeared on the outside, it felt endless in that moment, like a tunnel stretching far into something unknown, more psychological than physical. The deeper Tyler looked, the more he saw that this was not improvised. It had been built with precision, designed to exist unnoticed, engineered for secrecy. The paper folder still lay untouched at the edge of the top crate, its corners bent and stained, its spine held together by a rusted clip. Tyler reached for it, fingers brushing across its cover. The ink was faded, yet the handwriting remained legible, a list of names, numbers, partial codes. There was no school connection, no reference to supplies or maintenance. These documents did not belong in a building filled with students. They were records of movement, references to delivery points, locations across the city, scribbled in shorter than underlined repeatedly as though by someone verifying their own secrecy. This wasn't just storage, it was evidence. A creak behind them broke the moment, not from the door but from the floor just beyond it, the hallway. It was a slow sound, wood or tile shifting under weight, the kind of movement that betrayed someone trying not to be heard. Rocky's head turned sharply, his body followed. A second later, standing from his position near the crate, growling low, the rumble steady and controlled, like an engine idling before a sudden burst forward. Tyler froze, listening. The hallway moments ago, empty, was no longer still. He clicked his flashlight off and let the dim natural light filter through the cracked door. Shadows moved across the floor just enough to see Tyler stood carefully easing away from the crate, one hand lowering near his belt, the other resting lightly on Rocky's harness. The German shepherd's body had gone rigid again, his breathing silent, a predator's posture returning to him. He had sensed something before Tyler had heard it, not just sound, but presence. A weight had entered the hallway, and its intention was not friendly. Outside the door, a figure came into partial view, backlit by the distant glow of a classroom light. The janitor. He stood just to the side of the closet entrance, his shape slightly hunched, head tilted forward, arms at his sides. Not moving, not speaking, simply waiting. Tyler did not speak either. He stepped further into view, his frame now visible to the man outside, making no effort to hide. Rocky came with him, every muscle poised, every breath timed. The man's eyes flicked to the dog, his shoulders stiffened. Something passed between them, not spoken, not physical, but real. For several seconds neither moved. The hallway hummed faintly, the building around them still unaware of the breach it held within its walls. Tyler took in the man's posture, the tension in his hands, the faint twitch in his jaw. He wasn't surprised. That alone told Tyler more than any conversation ever could. He had come back not to clean or inspect or explain. He had returned to close what should never have been opened. Rocky took a step forward, placing himself fully in the doorway. Now his growl deepened, not loud, not aggressive, but final. The man's eyes lowered, slightly, not in submission but calculation. Tyler knew the look. A man measuring his chances. He had seen it before in alley confrontations, in quiet corners of abandoned buildings. In moments where secrets cracked open under too much light, the janitor no longer looked like an employee. He looked like a gatekeeper whose gate had just been forced. Ajar, Tyler stepped closer to the threshold, his boot brushing against the door. Behind him the room remained unchanged, crates, untouched, evidence sealed. Silence thick, but a head tension pulled like wire between 2 points. The door was no longer just open. It had drawn something out, something that had been hiding, not just in wooden walls, but in the faces they had passed all day without notice. Then from deeper down the hallway another sound, not a voice, not footsteps, but metal scraping against tile, another presence. The hallway wasn't empty. They were not alone anymore. The air shifted again, no breeze, no gust through open vents, but a shift. Nonetheless, like pressure suddenly thickened in the space around them. Tyler stood still, 1 foot just beyond the closet threshold, Rocky by his side, eyes fixed ahead, growl tucked tight in his throat. The janitor remained near the far wall, shoulders rigid, jaw clenched, yet his stillness had fractured. A bead of sweat traced down his temple, unnoticed by him, caught only in the corner of Tyler's trained eye, but it was the new sound, the dragging metallic scrape against tile that pulled focus down the hallway's length. Whatever was approaching wasn't doing so in a hurry. It moved deliberately, unhurried, but unhidden, like someone aware they were already too late to prevent discovery, but not yet ready to surrender to it. From the corner of the hallway near the emergency exit, a shape began to emerge, tall, narrow-shouldered, dressed in dark gray, a man in work boots and gloves, eyes obscured beneath the shadow of a black cap, pushed something heavy on a wheeled cart, something wrapped beneath a stained canvas tarp tied with rope across the top. The object's shape was irregular, bulky, not symmetrical, the kind of cargo meant to be hidden. He didn't speak or pause. His grip on the cart handle was casual, almost lazy, but his jaw worked side to side like he was chewing on every second. As he stepped further into the light, Tyler noticed the wire running from his sleeve to a small earpiece tucked behind one ear. Communication. That meant someone else. Rocky's body tensed again, and Tyler placed a light hand on his back, just enough to signal awareness without restraint. The dog's chest was tight, breathing short, ready to move. Tyler had seen that posture before, not in parks or crowded streets, but in raids in abandoned buildings where desperation crept like mold through silence. Rocky wasn't responding to movement, he was reacting to intention. This new man didn't carry himself like a janitor, nor a delivery driver. He moved like someone who had done this before, who had walked hallways unnoticed, pushed weight across tile under the illusion of maintenance. Always 1 step ahead of suspicion. Until now, the two men, the janitor and the stranger, exchanged no visible gesture, no words, but Tyler didn't miss the way their eyes locked for a second. A glance of recognition passed between them, just long enough to confirm what Tyler had already suspected. They were working together, whether part of a larger operation or isolated in their purpose. They had used the school as a shell, a place where secrets could rest comfortably among routine, where no one would look twice at a closet, a cart, a quiet man in uniform. Tyler's thoughts darted back to the crates in the hidden room, to the duffel bag seen on camera, to the coded papers and maps stacked like ordinary paperwork. None of it was ordinary, and this moment was the storm that Rocky had sensed all morning, the warning bark, the refusal to move on. The second burst of urgency, it had all been a response to the weight of this hidden network pressing against the walls of the school like a second reality. The man pushing the cart slowed his approach, finally stopping about 15 feet away. He made no move to open the tarp, no motion toward a weapon, yet his stance communicated something clear, a warning to back off, a dare to cross an unseen line. Tyler said nothing. He didn't have to. Rocky stepped forward with a controlled precision, just one pace. Shoulders squared, eyes locked. The air grew heavier behind them. The open closet door remained wide, its secrets no longer concealed, its silence exposed. A faint buzz came from the stranger's earpiece, a vibration more than a sound, and his hand rose reflexively toward it, pausing just short of contact. Tyler caught the motion, noting its purpose. He wasn't alone somewhere else in this building, or maybe outside it. Others were waiting, listening, tracking this unfolding situation with increasing unease, but their silence only confirmed their fear. Whatever was hidden here, whatever operation had crept into the foundation of this school, it had never been built to withstand exposure, and now its center had cracked open from down the hallway. Another door clicked faintly, a signal that more movement was beginning. The tension had only just begun to surface. Rocky did not blink. His eyes were fixed on the stranger with the cart, a figure who had entered the hallway like a shadow peeled from the corner of a nightmare. The canvas tarp covering the irregular shape was no longer just a mystery. It was a symbol, a quiet monument to everything Tyler had sensed building since the moment his partner barked at that forgotten door. The hallway, once filled with student chatter and fluorescent warmth, had changed into something tighter, something waiting to snap the school behind. Its orderly surfaces had revealed a breach, and now the source of that breach stood calmly in front of them. Cart in hand, gaze unwavering, yet behind the stillness, behind every moment that passed, an invisible countdown ticked downward. Tyler shifted his stance, boots settling evenly against the tile body, angled just enough to watch both men, the janitor by the wall and the new arrival by the cart. They said nothing, but their silence was heavy, not with fear, but with intent. This was no accident. The door had not been left unlocked by mistake. The crates were not the result of mislabeling or outdated records. This was organized and designed to stay hidden beneath the noise of a school day until Rocky refused to walk away. There was a reason. The tarp hadn't been touched. There was a reason the janitor had come back. Tyler had seen it before in storage units marked as abandoned, in trucks pulled over just long enough to avoid inspection, in hidden basements beneath boarded-up homes. Timing was everything. Secrets relied on rhythm, and something about today had gone wrong for them. Someone had arrived too early, or someone had failed to close something in time. Tyler and Rocky weren't part of the plan. They had disrupted the script. The hallway lights flickered, a subtle glitch, but one that felt like a signal. Rocky's ears twitched, head tilting slightly, nose pulling faint scents from the air. Tyler could sense it. To something beneath the surface, something mechanical, not just tension technology. There was a low hum now buried deep in the wall behind the lockers, and beneath the a hollow resonance that didn't belong to pipes or vents. It was a cavity, something not filled with insulation or wiring, but space. Then Tyler saw it, a sliver of metal behind the row of lockers to the left, not a locker itself, but a panel. It caught the light just barely enough to glint. It was recessed into the wall with a seam that didn't match the standard layout. He traced the angle in his mind. The hidden room, the janitor's closet, the direction of the crates this panel connected to it. It wasn't just a hidden storage room. It was a passage, a tunnel maybe, or a compartment built to run beneath the lockers, connecting one end of the school to the other, a system invisible from above but active below. Rocky took a slow step forward. Nose now inches from the metal. Seemed the stranger with the cart glanced over but did not move. His expression didn't shift, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of reaction. It was brief, but Tyler saw it. Recognition of exposure. That small movement, that sliver of attention told him everything. The trap wasn't behind them, it was ahead. Tyler's mind spun. If the crates were only part of the plan, then this corridor wasn't the end. It was the middle, and the canvas-covered object on the cart positioned so carefully rolled in at the perfect moment wasn't cargo to be retrieved. It was bait, a decoy designed to occupy attention while the real mechanism activated elsewhere. Perhaps a relay, perhaps a delayed ignition, perhaps something meant to be moved only if no one was watching. The hallway lights flickered again, this time twice. Rocky let out a sharp exhale through his nose, then turned his body, just slightly bracing with his front paws. Tyler's breath slowed. There was movement in the wall, a soft rhythmic thud like something sliding along a track from deeper inside the structure. An internal system came to life. One never mapped, never disclosed. The trap had already begun to close. Something massive was shifting beneath the school. It wasn't a rumble or a quake, not something felt in the feet. It was deeper, more surgical, like panels sliding open under layers of concrete, unlocking in sequence. Tyler felt it before he fully registered it, a change in pressure. A subtle difference in how the walls carried sound. The corridor had gone eerily quiet again, but not naturally. The silence now felt shaped, as if being controlled. Somewhere closed machinery moved beneath floor tiles that had carried the weight of students and faculty, all A system was activating, one not meant to be discovered. The school, ordinary on the outside, had begun to reveal something ancient in feeling yet modern in design. It was not a place of learning anymore, it was a shell. Rocky stood motionless at the metal panel beside the locker's, hackles raised along the ridge of his spine, eyes fixed on the faint seam in the wall behind them. The cart and its canvas covering remained untouched, but it no longer drew the same attention. Whatever purpose it served had already been past. It had been a diversion, a marker maybe, even a trigger. The true core of the operation was never the crates, never the storage, not even the passage. It was the building itself, modified over time, not from the top down, but from the foundation outward. A deep metallic clunk sounded under the floor, not loud, but deliberate, like a lock disengaging. Then a second. Tyler turned, narrowing his gaze as the ceiling lights pulsed once more, blinking rapidly before returning to static glow. But it wasn't just the power flickering. A current had shifted. The school's internal energy, once steady and mundane, had taken on a pattern Tyler recognized. The feel, it was the same sensation that preceded a controlled response, like how certain facilities triggered lockdowns, only this didn't come from school security. It came from below. The stranger with the cart had backed away slightly, not with panic, but restraint. His role, whatever it was, had now moved from stage 1 to stage 2. He reached down, not for the cart, but toward the edge of the wall behind him. Tyler's hand twitched ready, but the man stopped short of contact, his fingers hovering as if awaiting one more condition to be met. Rocky snapped his head toward the motion, his stance deepened, braced. Now not against the visible threat, but what could emerge behind it. Then it happened. A low groan of moving steel echoed through the floor, followed by a sudden gust of warm air venting from an unseen grate. The hatch somewhere out of sight had opened. What came next didn't involve people, it involved the system itself. From the opposite side of the hallway, locker doors began to rattle, not violently but rhythmically, each latch shaking in turn as if something were brushing behind them. In a wave, the sound crept along the wall, drawing closer to the hidden seam. Rocky had found the truth solidified in Tyler's chest. The lockers weren't just containers. They were false walls behind them, an entire channel of hollow space, possibly interconnected, possibly designed to move things through without being seen. It wasn't hard to imagine the crates being transported from a delivery point through those unseen tracks, bypassing cameras and staff completely, and now the system was resetting, closing itself down before full exposure. Rocky let out one sharp bark, not in alarm, in urgency. Tyler stepped back, scanning the hallway, mind racing. If these passages were wired for mobility, they could also be rigged for destruction. That was often the pattern secrecy required. Disposal. At that thought, a new sound, sharper, closer, unmistakable, the click of a timed relay mechanism arming somewhere in the floor. The system wasn't just retreating, it was preparing to erase itself. Whatever lay in the passages was meant to vanish along with all evidence. Tyler's instinct screamed to move, but his eyes were still on the panel. Rocky scratched once, then moved to the door they had opened earlier, the hidden room. He sat there, now staring back at his handler. A quiet command in his stillness. The real choice wasn't to run, it was to act. If they hesitated, the entire foundation of this place might collapse inward, leaving behind nothing but questions buried under silence. Tyler took one final look at the floor, then moved toward the hidden door. With Rocky right behind, the floor was no longer just a surface. It was a map of hidden intentions, a blueprint of silence that now pulsed with a dangerous rhythm. Something had been triggered, not from a control panel or visible switch, but from within the system itself. Tyler moved swiftly, heart steady but alert, every step calculated, across tile that suddenly felt fragile beneath his boots. The muffled sounds of movement grew louder, machinery shifting, steel gears engaging. A clockwork structure buried below the school's familiar surface. Rocky followed closely each of his movements, mirroring urgency without chaos. The German shepherd's instincts had pierced the illusion hours ago. Now the truth had caught up. The hallway behind them no longer felt like part of a school. It had transformed into a corridor of decisions, false walls, vented panels, moving carts, hidden passages, all pieces of something larger. The school had been used, reshaped section by section, until the original blueprint no longer matched what now existed beneath it. Someone had built a framework for disappearance, for transport, for hiding, and now that it had been uncovered, it was beginning to vanish by design. Tyler passed the janitor's closet, Once more, its door still open, its secrets now in the open air, but something deeper waited just ahead. Rocky stopped at the entrance to the hidden chamber. They had already breached the narrow room, disguised as storage filled with crates and files. Its scent marked by stale air and disturbed time. Rocky didn't enter. He waited, ears angled back, nose pointed toward a thin line in the wall near the far end of the space. Another seam, another passage. Tyler followed his gaze. The light from his flashlight grazed the seam, thinner than the first, less defined, nearly camouflaged by uneven drywall and old paint. But it was there. He stepped closer, brushing the surface with his gloved hand. It didn't resist. It shifted inward by a fraction of an inch as though accepting the pressure. Then it released. The panel slid sideways with a hiss of suction and exposed a narrow descending tunnel. Concrete steps disappeared downward into a chamber cut into the very bones of the school. The space beyond breathed warm air up into the room, damp and dense, carrying the metallic tang of machinery. Rocky moved first. His paws were silent on the concrete, each step steady, each descent more certain than the last. Tyler followed, light arcing across the walls. The staircase was steep, built not for comfort but function at the bottom. A chamber far larger than anything above suggested. The floor was smooth concrete, polished by time, and where rows of crates stood like sentinels, lined in perfect symmetry along both sides. The air was humming again. Mechanical controlled red indicator lights blinked along the far wall, connected to a panel the size of a filing cabinet. Its screen glowed softly, but the code running across it was foreign abbreviations, numbers. A countdown, 27 minutes. Tyler stepped back. The panel wasn't part of a storage system. It was part of a purge sequence, a fail-safe. If the system were compromised, everything would be incinerated, destroyed from within. No evidence, no questions. The false walls, the crates, the documents, all reduced to silence. Rocky sat at the edge of the chamber, now eyes pointed at a smaller door to the right of the console, narrow and metallic, sealed shut but surrounded by 4 vent pipes humming with pressure. Tyler crossed the room and examined it. It wasn't connected to any standard ventilation system. It was a release hatch, an emergency route. He turned toward the chamber center, eyes scanning for a manual override. Nothing visible. The system was designed to run independently. Start the countdown, seal the exits, complete the purge. Anyone left inside, when the clock hit 0, would disappear with it. Tyler exhaled slow and tight. He knew what he had to do. The mission wasn't just to escape, it was to delay. Stop the purge if possible. Alert the right hands before the chamber turned to ash above them. The hallway might have returned to silence, but below the system was preparing to erase everything. Rocky looked back. Once ready, the clock kept ticking. The countdown had reached 17 minutes. The screen blinked relentlessly each second, vanishing into the next like sand slipping through unseen fingers. In the center of the underground chamber, surrounded by rows of crates filled with classified material and evidence never meant to surface, Officer Tyler Kane stood at the edge of a decision. Rocky was just ahead of him, tail low, chest rising, with sharp control body angled toward the emergency hatch that had no keypad, no handle, no obvious release. Every path above had been engineered to seal, not save. The building wasn't designed for evacuation. It was designed to bury what it held. Tyler wasn't sure who had constructed the system or when, but the longer he looked at the blinking panel, the clearer it became. This school had been the perfect place to hide something powerful by surrounding it with innocence. He circled the console once more, eyes searching for a weak point, a code override, anything to slow the automated sequence. The commands written on the screen weren't in plain English. They were masked in symbols and strings of characters that didn't match anything he'd seen in standard law enforcement systems. This wasn't government issue. It was custom, likely private, built by someone with resources in reach. A hidden server, perhaps a buried signal. Somewhere someone knew what this chamber was truly for, but in the silence beneath the school, Tyler was the only one who had found it, and time was no longer on his side. Rocky paced along the crate line, now nose brushing lightly against one of the containers as he sniffed carefully. Then he stopped, tail frozen, body locked. He barked once loud, sharp, urgent, not in fear and command. Tyler turned immediately. The bark had come not from panic but from certainty. Rocky stood next to a crate near the rear corner, its base slightly uneven. Tyler moved quickly toward it, crouching beside the dog. He ran his hand along the edge of the floor, finding a narrow groove. Cut beneath the crate's front panel with a firm pull, the crate shifted, sliding back several inches and revealing a small recessed panel set into the floor, a steel square with a worn red ring around its perimeter. A secondary control port, hidden sealed away, reachable only by instinct. He pried the panel open and revealed a second set of switches, 3 toggles and a circular dial, no labels. No instructions, but the toggles hummed faintly with current. Tyler reached for the center switch and paused. There was no certainty here, only instinct and consequence, but if Rocky trusted the crate, Tyler would trust the panel. He flipped the center toggle down. The humming deepened, not in intensity but in frequency. The countdown on the screen jumped. 17 minutes became 32. The purge had not been stopped, but it had been delayed. B-time, a temporary reprieve enough to alert backup, enough to get the message out. Tyler pulled his phone, fingers flying across the screen as he typed a burst message to dispatch, coded urgent location, pinned, flagged for immediate attention. He hit send. A faint chirp confirmed transmission. Somewhere above, someone would read it. Someone would know they had to come, that there was something beneath the school they had to see for themselves. It wouldn't be long, but every second mattered. He turned toward the emergency hatch. Rocky had already moved to it, barking again. This time louder, a sharp echo that bounced across the walls, punching into the pipes above. Tyler approached it, stepping past the crates. He pressed his palm to the surface. It didn't budge, but Rocky didn't move away. He barked again and again, then suddenly something clicked. The bark had triggered an auditory sensor embedded in the hatch itself, a hidden lock keyed, not to voices but to frequencies, to barks. The hatch hissed open. Tyler didn't wait. He stepped through with Rocky behind him. The passage was narrow, leading into an incline that rose sharply, metal stairs. A concrete tunnel. The air changed with every step, from warm and dense to cooler, crisper than daylight. Sharp and blinding, they emerged behind the school's old maintenance shed, the door swinging wide behind them. Before clicking shut, the chamber was sealed once more, but not lost. Sirens rose in the distance. Rocky stood tall beside him.